Hi, my name is Angela Peters. I'm a member of the Illinois State Bar Association, and we have four people on our panel today. Two of them are from the Immigrant Justice Legal Clinic, the Resurrection Project, I'm sorry. And we have two other members from the Illinois State Bar Association. One of them, Natalia Curto, is the chair of the International and Immigration Section Council. Dina Ninfo is the chair of the ISBA Leadership Council. And I'd like to tell you that Catherine Greenslade is the director of the Immigrant Justice Legal Clinic. And Andres Diaz Jr. is the Resurrection Project of Immigrant Justice Legal Clinic. And we are here today to join forces with the Resurrection Project and the Illinois State Bar Association to give you as much information as we have on hand right now in relation to the emergency situations facing immigrants. And I'd like to turn this over now to our panel. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for having us here today to talk about what's been going on with immigration enforcement in Chicago and around the country recently. Just as we get started, I'd like to share a couple of key terms. When we talk about ICE, we mean Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This is the U.S. federal agency responsible for enforcing immigration laws, including detention and deportation. And when we use the term law enforcement agency, we could be talking about several different agencies that can play key roles in upholding the law, such as police departments, state patrol, FBI, DEA, and U.S. Marshals. Next slide. So, some rights that we all have when encountering law enforcement is we have the right to remain silent. You can remain silent, or you can exercise this right by saying loudly that you wish to remain silent. Do not have to permit entry to your home or your car. You don't have to open the car door or the door of your home unless ICE or the police have a signed judicial warrant. It's important not to sign anything without speaking with legal counsel, and you have the right to speak with and be represented by an attorney. Unlike in the criminal justice system, where an attorney is provided if you cannot afford one, in immigration court, you have the right to an attorney, but it is at your own expense. We also recommend that you request a local telephone call, and it's really important that you memorize the phone number of at least two family or friends, especially in this era where everybody's got everyone's number in their cell phone. Take the time to make sure that you have two numbers memorized. Next slide. So here we have a sample of what is called an administrative warrant. These warrants are not signed by a judge, and they're more or less, sometimes they're not signed at all. You'll see at the bottom is a place for an ICE office official to sign. We often see that they're unsigned. They are not judicial warrants and do not permit entry into your home. Next slide. This is a judicial warrant. So if ICE comes to your home with a judicial warrant or your place of business, you want to make sure that it's signed by the judge on the bottom, that it has the correct name and date and location. It should be specific, looking for a particular person at a particular address. It should have a valid date and a judge's signature. Next slide. So this is just a comparison. If we're looking at them side by side, you'll see on the left-hand side is a sample judicial warrant, which, if properly signed and executed, would allow entry into your home. Whereas the administrative warrant, which would be signed by an ICE official, and again, oftentimes is unsigned, does not permit entry into your home. So it's important to know your rights with ICE. At home, you do not need to open the door. If you live in a home with children, it's very important to teach them not to open the door for someone they don't know. You are not required to open the door unless ICE has that warrant signed by a judge. If they enter, If they ask to enter, you can ask them to show you the warrant either through a window nearby or to slip the warrant under the door. If they force their way in, though, we recommend that you don't resist, and that you make sure everyone in the household knows that they should exercise their right to remain silent. If you are arrested, you should remain silent and you should not sign anything until you have the opportunity to speak to a lawyer. At work, you also have rights when it comes to ICE. So ICE must have a warrant, again, signed by a judge, or permission from the employer to enter private areas of the workspace. ICE can enter public areas without permission. Being in public area, however, does not give ICE authority to stop, question, or arrest just anyone. You do not have to answer any questions, and you have the right to remain silent. It's also important to remember that you should never carry any false identification or other false documents with you. Okay, so in public, your rights with ICE vary from those in your home and in the workplace. In public places, ICE does not need a warrant to search public places. If ICE stops you on the street, you're not required to show identification or answer any questions. You can ask, am I free to go? And if yes, you should walk away calmly. If ICE says no, remember again that you have the right to remain silent. What happens during a traffic stop? So if ICE stops you while driving, they can require you to show license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance. If an ICE officer sees a TDVL, they will likely ask for another form of ID. It's important to remember in Illinois that as of July of 2024, the temporary visitor driver's license now looks like a standard license. So if you have the old form of the TDVL, it's important to update that immediately. Do not answer any questions about your immigration status. Do not open the window or the door unless ICE has a valid judicial warrant, and request to see that warrant through the car window if needed. If you are detained by ICE, only provide your name and date of birth. You are not required to give this information, but we do know, and we'll talk a little bit more later in the presentation, that it can take days for family and attorneys to locate folks who have been detained. So providing your name and date of birth will help with finding you in the ICE detainee locator system. If you have an A number, meaning you've previously had some contact with the immigration system, either at a port of entry, at the border, because you applied for an immigration benefit, it's important to try to memorize your A number. You should ask to talk to an attorney. All detention centers should let you make a call, but oftentimes there is a charge. Only inform your lawyer about your immigration status. It's also important for folks who've been detained to remember that phone calls to family members are not private. Those are on recorded lines, so they should not discuss their immigration status or things about their immigration case on a line that's not with an attorney. You shouldn't ask to see a judge, and you should not sign anything without speaking with legal counsel. So what can you do if a family member has been detained by ICE? To locate them, you can go to locator.ice.gov. You will need their full legal name, their country of origin and their date of birth, or their country of origin and that A number that I mentioned previously. You can call the consulate's emergency phone number. Here in Chicago, that's the Mexican consulate's phone number, and then the other number below it is the Mexican consulate anywhere in the US. If your family member is eligible for bond, which we'll talk about a little bit more again later, is very unlikely these days, the person who pays the bond must have legal status and must pay 100% of the bond in full. Unlike criminal bonds where you may be able to pay a percentage of the bond, in the immigration context, 100% must be paid upfront. Your family member can call an attorney or a legal representative. So it's important to know that we do not have any ICE detention centers in Illinois. So uh, Illinois residents who are detained are then sent to the Broadview Processing Center and then sent outside of the state of Illinois. They're transferred to facilities in Wisconsin, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Missouri, Ohio, Oklahoma, Texas, occasionally other places, but most commonly, those are the places that we see folks sent to facilities. Um, for folks who have a family member who's detained, you can fill out a help form at trpimmigrantjustice.org, or you can contact the ICER Family Support Hotline at 855-435-7693. And then for families that may need help getting bond, which again is a very small reality these days, they can go to the Midwest Bond Fund, and that information is there below. Okay, so a couple other things when we think about how can we know if it's ICE or if it's local police. So local police in every jurisdiction have distinct uniforms with identifying insignia. For those of us here in Chicago, we can picture the Chicago PD uniform. It's blue. It's got the insignia on the sleeve. They should look distinct from federal agents who are often wearing civilian or plain clothes, but maybe wearing a bulletproof vest. Sometimes those vests say police and nothing else, which can lead to confusion. But, there's usually a distinct uniform for local police. As we've seen here in Chicago and other places, the ICE agents or others who have been deputized to work with ICE are often also now wearing masks and covering their faces. Per, I think, an order from the mayor a few weeks ago, Chicago PD have been asked to wear uniforms when out on patrol and to not cover their faces. So that should be two different ways that you can distinguish them from ICE or other federal agents. It's important to remember, though, that you do have rights when it comes to the police. So in Illinois, if the police stop or arrest you, it's important to remember that they should not be cooperating with ICE, and there are laws in place to prevent that. So in Illinois, police are prohibited from asking you about your immigration status. That comes from the Illinois Way Forward Act. We also, Illinois police are prohibited from holding you for what's called an ICE detainer, which is an extended period of time after processing you for whatever local arrest at the request of ICE, and that is the Illinois Trust Act. In some cities in Illinois, we have sanctuary city laws, such as here in Chicago, that prohibit local governments from cooperating with ICE. But that does not mean that ICE cannot, as we have seen, operate and make arrests within those cities. And then here's just another reminder, if you are stopped, you can ask if you're free to go, and you can report violations or ICE activity to OCAD at the number there below. So if you are stopped or detained while driving, as a passenger, you're not required to have a license or ID to be in the vehicle. Drivers, of course, should not drive without a license, and it's important to remember that even undocumented immigrants in Illinois may be eligible for a driver's license. Excuse me. You do not have to answer any questions about where you were born or how long you have been in the United States. So pending cases, it's very important, even though we have seen ICE activity at local courthouses, that folks continue to attend court hearings. Abandoning court cases can escalate issues, including a warrant for arrest. It also means that cases can go unresolved. If in a local arrest situation, Illinois does not use a cash bail system. So just as a reminder, pre-trial hearings determine release eligibility. And things that might affect that would be your whether you pose a threat to the community, pose a threat to another person, or have a medical or mental health issue that poses a risk to your safety or the safety of others. So again, just as a reminder of Illinois policies when it comes to local law enforcement and ICE, Illinois law generally prohibits participation in civil immigration enforcement by state and local law enforcement. There are some limited exceptions. A local law enforcement agency in Illinois cannot give an immigration agent access to individuals in its custody, detain individuals pursuant to a federal administrative warrant, detain individuals pursuant to an ICE detainer, as I mentioned earlier, share information about individuals in its custody with federal immigration authorities. And then local law enforcement officers cannot arrest an individual for a violation of federal law without a warrant unless state law has granted them authority to do so. And Illinois law prohibits local law enforcement from stopping, arresting, searching, or detaining an individual based on their citizenship or immigration status. So again, I mentioned these previously, but we have these three laws in Illinois, the Illinois Trust Act, the Voices Act, and the Way Forward Act, which help bolster community trust and cooperation. We have the Voices Act, which helps support victims of trafficking or violent crime, and the Way Forward Act, which expanded the protections and authorizes the Illinois Attorney General to conduct investigations and bring civil enforcement actions to ensure compliance. Okay, so breaking it down even a little further, in Chicago, we also have some policies regarding assistance to ICE. We have the Welcoming City Ordinance here in Chicago that ensures that the city protects its immigrant residents regardless of their immigration status. The ordinance prevents city agencies from inquiring about or sharing immigration status information with federal authorities and guarantees that city services are available to all individuals without discrimination based on immigration status. So the key provisions there are non-cooperation with ICE, access to critical city service, and due process protections. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what you can do during a law enforcement encounter. It's important to verify, document, and report. So by verifying, we want to determine the officer's agency, whether they are police or ICE. You can, again, look at their uniform for identifying marks, such as a badge, a police department name, something like that. You want to ask for names and titles and agency. You may want to ask the reason for the arrest or the stop. In Illinois, you can record an encounter with video or audio, and you want to document the details of any questioning, search, or arrest. If you are a bystander, it's important that you report what happened to OCAD. And again, there is that number 855-435-7693 to report any incidents of ICE or other federal law enforcement activity. A few important things to remember, though, when filming a law enforcement encounter, you do have the right to record public interactions with police and ICE. We do ask, though, that you put your own safety and the safety of others first and foremost. So do not obstruct the police or ICE officer. You want to make sure you're filming from a safe distance. If possible, you want to narrate what's happening on that recording. So specific times, dates, locations, descriptions of what you're seeing. But you do need to obey commands from police or ICE and move back or give them space if requested. If they ask you to stop filming, you want to protect your personal safety, so you may need to stop filming if it makes sense to do so. We ask that you not ask for names when making recordings. Instead, you may want to ask somebody for a phone number that you can use to contact a loved one for them and let them know what happened. Okay, and I think at this point, I'm turning it over to my colleague Andres, who's going to talk about what's happening right now.
Hi, everyone. So we want to talk about what's happening, especially in the last month or so here in the Chicagoland area and all over the country. So essentially, immigration enforcement is done by ICE in the interior, and CBP, they are the ones that are along the border and ports of entry. So they're coming in from like Detroit to southern border, airports, that sort of thing. However, now we're seeing all different types of federal immigration agencies that are on the ground, that are in the streets making arrests. We just saw that over the weekend downtown, where CBP was essentially walking down Michigan Avenue. They were on the river, places that we typically would not see uh, that type of law enforcement. Aside from ICE and CBP, we're also seeing other agencies. So that includes the FBI, the DEA, and other agencies that fall under the Department of Justice. They're even expanding to include USCIS and the State Department, which is typically not a law enforcement agency. So that's what we're seeing, and that's something to be aware of. And that can lead to confusion, not only in terms of the different, the difference between police. Is the police doing a criminal arrest? Is it something else? But also, if we see the FBI, we think that, it's a federal criminal case, but it could very well be that it's just an FBI agent who's been assigned to help ICE make arrests for that particular day. So just something to be aware of. And nowadays, what we're seeing is essentially that essentially anyone who the government thinks or is here without authorization is now a target. Under the previous administration, there were certain enforcement priorities which allowed those limited resources to be focused on people that were considered to be a threat to public safety. Those restrictions have been lifted, and now essentially we're seeing a wide variety of people getting arrested. And some statistics show that about 60% of individuals have been detained by ICE have no criminal convictions. So essentially, it could be anyone. The biggest groups that we're seeing are individuals with final removal, orders of removal. So these are people that maybe missed their hearing, so they had an in absentia order. Maybe they lost their case and their appeal has been exhausted, or in some way have an order of removal. People that have recently entered, maybe within the last few years, they were apprehended upon entry, they were allowed in, and now immigration has their information and was able to locate them fairly easily. Individual with criminal history, so ICE has they're able to search databases and find information. So, they're outside courthouses and by jails and making those arrests. And also individuals that are simply at the wrong place at the wrong time, what we call collateral arrest. They're going for someone, maybe that person doesn't live there anymore, and instead they see someone else and they take that person instead, or any bystanders that may be nearby. And these types of arrests are happening in a lot of different places. They're happening at ICE check-ins when people that have a reporting requirement are told to come in, whether it's at a pre-scheduled check-in or they're getting text or other notices saying come in, and then they're detained. They also get arrested at the immigration courts. So they go to the hearings like they're supposed to, and they could be detained there. We've heard about that happening at asylum offices. So, in courts where people should be attending their hearings or they're getting arrested. Local courts. So we've, hear about criminal courts, but also there's been reports of them being spotted in other places like TV court and things like that, places where we want people to be able to access without any fear of detention. They typically sometimes arrest specific individuals in what's called targeted arrests, but it's not always the case. And yeah, essentially they're at houses waiting for people to leave. That's usually how it's done. They may just kind of wait and see until the person leaves and make a traffic stop. But they also go to other places where they may think that people are there, or they think they can just find someone. So essentially, they're just kind of all over the place at this point. So as far as what happens once they're detained, so many are deported very quickly. If they've had a order of removal, ICE can essentially execute that order pretty quickly, and depending on the country, depending on logistics, they could, be sent out pretty quickly. Those that have been here for less than 2 years, they're at a heightened risk because of expedited removal, so they might even get to see a judge. Some of them are essentially being, in many ways, coerced or forced into signing voluntary departure, waiving the right to see a judge because of the conditions we're seeing at the jails, and people don't want to sit too long, so they just send away their rights and leave. There's now mandatory detention, so essentially pretty much only people that have entered with some sort of visa, whether it could be a tourist visa, a student visa, work visa, that sort of thing, are eligible for bond. So that's a new policy that has taken effect in the last few months and led to a lot of people being held in jail. People are being transferred quickly and across the country. As we mentioned before, we don't have any detention facilities here in Illinois, so they're sent all over the place. ICE will contract with local jails in other parts of the country where they have bed space. They'll put them there. We were seeing many different jails pop up all over the place where suddenly people were being sent, and there's also new facilities opening up. There's one in Miami, in Indiana, that's going to be that's opened recently. There's also one down in Texas, and I'm sure there's many others. So, and that makes it very difficult to contact clients, right? So even if someone is fortunate enough to have pro bono counsel, to hire an attorney, to talk to them and be able to do a consultation, give advice, it's very challenging. So just to provide a little bit more sort of legal background, right? It's important there's two main things to keep in mind. Expedited removal is for people that have been apprehended within 2 years of entering the country, or people that can't prove that they've been here for longer than 2 years. And that is essentially makes it very challenging to fight for a way to stay here. There's no right to an immigration judge. It's all done through a DHS officer. The only way to stop it is if you express a fear of return, and then that puts them into this credible fear interview process, which I'm sorry, back. So that's one thing to remember. And then 240 proceedings, that's what we call full immigration proceedings. That's where people see a judge and essentially fight their case. There is no right to counsel. That you have to essentially hire one or find one that can represent you at no expense to the government. And unlike criminal court, where usually the burden is on the government to prove the allegations, in the immigration court, there's different burdens that take place, and essentially, usually that involves the respondents, as they're called, having the burden of proof when applying for relief. A couple other things is reinstatement of removal, which, like I mentioned, people that have prior orders that can be reinstated. In absentia, people that miss their court dates, those can sometimes be reopened depending on the reason for missing courts. People that are in order of supervision, so they were granted some type of relief that allows them to stay here, or there's a humanitarian factor that they were allowed to stay. They get a work permit. They're saying that a lot of individuals that have orders of supervision are getting those rescinded and they're being detained. And here, as we mentioned before, there are different rights. DHS doesn't seem to be following sort of the Fourth Amendment search and seizure protections that we should all enjoy. Essentially, they're engaging in racial profiling based on a person's appearance, the job, the location. They're taking people without apparent probable cause. It's just stopping them and taking them. Some potential remedies are a motion to suppress an immigration court, although because of the different burdens, makes it very challenging to win. Writs of habeas corpus can be a good option and one tool that is being used, and there's a high need for in district courts. Here in the what is the jurisdiction of ICE from Chicago, there is a class action lawsuit, Castañón-Nava versus DHS, that essentially provides some remedy for those warrantless collateral arrests. So That is highly technical, but you can click the link here and it'll take you to a website that can explain more about that. And that for that type of relief, it's important for the arrest, the encounter to be well documented, whether it's by the person being detained, remembering what happened, or by someone who may be observing. And so some rules that we have, a couple of things to remember is that ICE arrests happen very quickly. So they may show up in armored vehicles, they just take someone and they could be in and out in minutes, seconds. So there's not a lot of time to kind of prepare, so you kind of always have to be on the lookout. Usually unmarked vehicles, as we mentioned, they're not in a typical uniform. Some of them are dressed in military type of uniform. Some may be wearing street clothes. They're usually have covered faces. Just a couple reminders there on how to stay safe if you see that. When people are detained, they're taken to, at least here in Illinois, they're taken to a center in Broadview, which is here in the suburbs. That is not a detention facility where people are supposed to be held for long term. However, because of logistical issues, we've been seeing that people are detained there for a very long time. We're very crowded, inhumane conditions, but they should be transferred pretty quickly. And when they are, they're sent to places all over the Midwest, all over the country. I can always use that to find them. That is not always accurate either. So sometimes Googling, sometimes going into the actual jails roster and then looking for the person. If someone's at one jail and they're not showing up, you might have to kind of dig around a little bit. Once they're transferred and they go before an immigration judge, they could end up in a wide variety of different court venues. So for people in Illinois, you would think in Chicago, but they could be transferred to Missouri and have a case in Kansas City. They could go to Indiana and end up in Indianapolis. Court in Cleveland, Memphis, Detroit, depending on where they're detained and where that detention facility is assigned to. And here are just a few things that we've heard from clients, from people in the community, other colleagues about what's happening at Broadview. So it's something to be aware of. And as I mentioned before, essentially bail, bond, as we call it, is very limited nowadays, based on a new interpretation of the law that immigration judges and the Board of Immigration Appeals have done. We're hoping that the circuit courts can maybe have some favorable case law. DHS can parole people at any time, but they do not. Before they would occasionally, but now it's their blanket policy that no one gets parole, no one is released. And even if people win withholding or CAT relief, which is protection under the Convention Against Torture, they are detained for 180 days, and then the government will try to deport them to a third country. So if there's someone who is from Venezuela and wins withholding, they could later on try to send them to Mexico, where they might not know anyone and be at risk in a different place. So as we try to sort of fight back against all of this, one thing that we've sort of put together is something called the Midwest Immigrant Defenders Alliance. And this is a collective of various organizations that have come together to essentially provide no-cost representation to Illinois residents. The capacity is limited, and currently we're focusing on those individuals that are in the 6th, 7th, and 8th circuits, but there are some exceptions there. So by submitting a request into our link that was in the previous slide, that goes into the central database that essentially these organizations collectively go in and triage and do as best as we can to try to help. And we've had a lot of success through MEPA.
I can jump back in here if you want. So just a few resources here. Immigration legal resources, you can go to IllinoisImmigrationInfo.org. You can also sign up for virtual trainings for Know Your Rights. Those are Tuesdays at 2 p.m. in English and Thursdays at 6 p.m. in Spanish. You can also request a specific group or individualized presentation on Know Your Rights through the link there. Again, if you see ICE activity or federal immigration enforcement activity, you can report it to 855-435-7693. Next slide. We also have some KYR resources that include door signs, and those can also be found at illinoisimmigrationinfo.org. And then here's just a breakdown of what to do, again, in different situations. So you're witnessing ICE activity. We really strongly encourage you to report that through the Family Support Network and call 855-435-7693. You want to be able to share the location, date, time, and what you saw. By doing that, there's a rapid response team that will then verify and support. We want to make sure that we're not spreading misinformation. So, it's important to call the Family Support Network so that they can verify that activity rather than spreading it on social media or sharing unverified information. If you know someone who has been detained, you want to gather those details, and then you want to fill out TRP's detained loved one form so that they can get in the queue for our centralized system and the Midwest Immigrant Defenders Alliance, which Andres just talked about. If someone has an upcoming ICE or ISAP check-in or an upcoming court hearing, they can register for a workshop where we can provide pro se assistance and support and potential accompaniment to those appointments. Here is just, we also have resources in the form of KYR cards that are small and wallet size and can be carried around by folks. Next slide. If you'd like to request a training, we have several different types of trainings available, including Know Your Rights, Protecting Your Assets, emergency family planning, organizational readiness for employers and their staff, and then small business readiness. So what can you do if you'd like to support? I think Andres would agree with me that immigration law is a beast and dabbling is not recommended. But we do want to be, good community members and support the families in our neighborhoods. You can help by helping families create a family emergency plan. The Illinois Legal Aid Online has some great resources for temporary guardianship and other documents that families may want to have in place in the case of family separation or detainment or deportation of parents. There's a high demand for habeas litigation, especially because, as Andres mentioned, mandatory detention has made almost everyone ineligible for bond. The venue for that is typically where the person is placed in detention. So especially for attorneys who are able to litigate in other jurisdictions, there's a high need for that. However, if we can get those habeas petitions filed quickly, then, folks can, while folks are still at Broadview, then those cases can remain here in the Northern District. We would encourage you to donate to immigrant serving organizations. We also have opportunities to canvass or, other sort of volunteer work spreading Know Your Rights information. And I'll just make a plug that we are hiring. Come join Andres's team and be part of, supporting folks who are in detention. And I think that's it. Any questions?
If I may, I would like to thank you, Catherine and Andres, for your presentation. It was very informative. And I want to repeat that I was looking at the page numbers, and page 38 and pages after that are very detailed about what individuals can do. Because if I were someone in the position of being detained, I think I would be overwhelmed with reading all the pages, which they must do. But your presentation was put together very well. Thank you. And I would now like to turn it over to Natalia and Dina. I'm sure you have some questions for Catherine and Andres.
Thank you, Angela. Yes, I do have some comments and questions. First of all, I would like to give a big thank you to Catherine and Andres for this presentation today. So I would like to point out some issues that I think is important to bear in mind. For example, I always tell the clients, if you are detained, you don't have to give any information. You have to say that I want to remain silent. But at the same time, I always advise to have documents that can show that they have been in the States for more than 2 years. For example, I usually mention driver's license, bank accounts, or it can be any other documents to show that they have been in the States for more than 2 years. Because, for example, if ICE look into the bags or if they don't respect the law, at least they have evidence that they have been here for more than 2 years, and they should escape the expedite removal proceeding that was mentioned before. Another thing that I would like to point out is that if someone is subject to expedite removal, and of course, if this is true, that person should say, I have fear to return to my country. Because otherwise, if the person is in expedite removal proceeding, it will be very easy to be removed from the States. And at least one thing that could stop, at least for a while, the expedite removal proceeding would be to express a fear. And I would say, I have the fear to return. I can't return to my country. I will be killed. So that maybe this will lead to a credible fear interview and potentially to an asylum claim. Now I have two questions. So my first question is, because I was asked this today, can I sign a G28 in case my family member is detained? I don't think so, because the G28 is usually signed for UCIS. There was a card that I was shown before that says, if you contact my attorney, and then you can provide the name and the phone number. So my question would be, what do you recommend to have something in place before the person is detained so that ICE knows that I'm going to be representing that individual? This is
Yeah.
one question.
Sure. Yeah. So there's a couple of different options that people have. So the G28 covers not only USAS, but also covers ICE and ERO, enforcement and
Okay.
removal operations. So essentially to maybe express a fear on their behalf or ask questions, ICE typically requires a G28. So one option, well, there's three options. One is that there's a new system, and I don't have the link memorized. It is in my bookmarks that I frequent very often, is you can submit a electronic G28. It doesn't require any signatures from the individual. It's all done electronically. You have to create an account, and then you just submit that information. You really only need their name, their AIM number, actually. And then that will lodge in the ICE system. So that way they should at least communicate with you in some ways. You can download it, edit it into an email to ERO. And also you should get notifications if the person is transferred from one facility to another. So that's one option. Another one is, just have a G28 that has already been completed. And if someone, for example, if I represent someone and they tell me like, hey, you know what happens if I'm detained, I'd like to have a G28 on file. So that way, I can submit it as necessary. And another method, one that I've used, and is essentially you can simply write detained in the where the person is supposed to sign. The client is supposed to sign. In the past, DHS would honor that just because they know that people are detained. It's not easy to get a signature. I don't know if they still do because of this new electronic system. But I think in that situation, try them all and exert all efforts to try to get that G28 on file and advocate for your client.
I
May I
would,
ask a question? What is the G28? I'm sorry. Just so everyone knows.
Yeah, the G28 is the official government form that is used to enter an appearance before the Department of Homeland Security. So as people enter an appearance, for example, in court, they may use a motion or a form. This is a specific form. It's called G-28. You can Google it, and it's free online. And it requires some information about you, the attorney, and the client. What the matter is about, and that's what's used.
I would just caution that, individuals should be cautious when, there is a lot of potential for fraud and scams always in immigration. It's a population that's very, vulnerable, and I think especially now, there's a lot of high risk. So with the pre-signed G28, I would just, make sure that folks are, if they're going to do that, that it's with a reputable attorney, that it's somebody that they've spoken to previously, that it isn't just a quick scam, sign a G28 or pay a bunch of money to someone to have a pre-signed G28 for circumstances that maybe would be unforeseen at the time that the G28 is signed.
I have a question. Natalia, you mentioned, and this was in the PowerPoint, if there's a credible fear of return, that somebody can have an interview. And I deal with a lot of people from the Ukraine who are here on TPS, temporary protective status, which doesn't exist anymore. And they obviously went through interviews when they came here in the first place. Is there a realistic idea that this second ultimate interview is not going to send them back, that is going to say, yes, you should stay here?
Do you
Yeah,
want me? Yeah, go ahead,
Whoever feels comfortable with that.
Yeah,
I'm just curious.
yeah, I can answer that. So I'll open the question a little more broadly. I think the situation with Ukraine is a bit different because that was part of a special program, and usually it involves, kind of flying here and that sort of thing, which is different than, the people that we're seeing being detained now. But generally speaking, if a person, DHS is supposed to ask if a person has a fear. They may not, or even if a person says yes, they may, just ignore it. But yeah, a person should, if they have a fear, express it. And DHS should follow procedures to essentially, put them in line for the CFI or RFI interview, which is typically done by an asylum officer over the phone. And because, there is that chance that DHS may not follow through on those requirements, having counsel who can advocate by, submitting an email and following up with ICRO and saying, hey, my client's detained at Clay County Jail. He has a fear of return. Here's my G28. We'd like a CFI, and documenting that. And then if they don't, that's where a habeas could really come in handy.
Thank you. Dina, do you have any questions for Catherine or Andres or Natalia?
Yeah, I got a couple of follow-ups to some of the contents. I don't know if you know the answer to this. I've never thought about this before, but obviously we all know only the attorney communication when you're making a call from a detention center is protected. If you are calling family and friends, do you know if those phone calls are traceable?
I'm sorry, do you mean like if I call a loved one or some clients or potential clients?
I'm just wondering, yeah, I'm wondering if we've heard any stories of them tracing those phone calls to locate other people.
Not that I've heard of, because that would typically require a warrant. There has been some information out there about DHS using what we can maybe call advanced technology that can use as like a facial recognition and maybe things that we don't fully understand out on the street. But as far as calling and sort of eavesdropping, I don't think that is a current concern, and hopefully it doesn't become one.
The other question I had is when you're talking about people going to court and to make sure they don't miss court dates so it doesn't escalate a problem, I'm assuming that obviously includes both criminal and maybe an immigration hearing. Is that same advice for other types of hearings? So, for example, we're seeing them go into domestic violence courthouses across the country where people are just trying to get OPs or any other kind of relief in that situation that maybe they weigh the risk of missing that court date versus getting, encountering ICE. Is that all court dates or is this criminal and immigration that we're giving them?
I mean, I think for different types of cases, that's what risks there might be need to be discussed with that person's counsel for that particular matter. In the immigration context, failure to appear at a court date would result in an in absentia removal order. So I think, it's important that people continue to attend all their immigration hearings. And then, we do see that, failure in the criminal context can lead to warrants. It can also, unresolved criminal issues, however minor, if somebody then later ends up in immigration detention, remain unresolved. So, as much as possible, folks should continue to be safe, but also, make sure that they comply with the requirements for different courts.
Yeah, and I just want to add that nowadays, because of the use of Zoom, WebEx, sometimes it can be virtual hearings, and at least with for example, the Chicago Immigration Court, some judges allow that without a motion. You just log in and appear, from your home, from your office. Some judges may require a motion. It's hard to know sometimes, but ideally, if a person is represented, that attorney needs to, assess the risk and advise their client and perhaps do a virtual hearing if there is word that DHS is making arrests. And I can't speak to sort of the state hearings and that sort of thing, but I believe that is a common practice and one to consider given everything that's going on.
I know Natalia has some wrap-up questions, but I just want to thank you as well for being here and putting this together and taking the time with us while you're extremely busy. And thank you for all the work you're doing.
Well,
Oh,
thank you.
yes, I have a final question. I'm very worried about ICE detaining people who have filed for an asylum case, either at the immigration court or even at the asylum office. So I think you mentioned filing an habeas corpus. So the question would be how this habeas corpus going? Are they being approved? People are being released? And if you have any other suggestions for these cases.
Sure. So, so a habeas essentially, and I'm, sort of still fairly new to that sort of piece of the puzzle, but we have heard some success stories in terms of at least providing safeguards by the district court, by those judges to essentially have DHS follow certain procedures, right? To provide due process and essentially mandate the government to do what they're supposed to do under the immigration laws, under the Code of Federal Regulations, and as just basic, due process requirements. So it's very case by case, but habeas is just a very helpful tool that is being used in many ways to safeguard people's due process rights.
It will just also note that once folks are transferred outside of Illinois, so once they leave the Broadview Processing Center, then the habeas typically has to be filed in the district where they're being held, which makes it more challenging. So, we're trying to work with other organizations and pro bono attorneys to try to see how there are ways to file more habeas petitions while folks are still in Illinois.
I do have, since Natalia had a final question, I guess I have a final question. And the final question, I'm looking at page 21 of the materials Catherine and Andres put together. and it talks about Chicago policies regarding assistance to ICE. And I think it needs to be clearly understood that if somebody is sent by ICE out of Illinois and out of the city of Chicago, then those policies don't exist. Is that true? For that individual?
Yeah, so essentially, more or less, what this does is that you know, federal immigration law is to be enforced by the U.S. federal government, right? It is not a job of the local law enforcement to enforce federal immigration law. There's plenty of laws in the books in Illinois and all other states, and police should be focusing on enforcing those laws to make communities safer and not diverting those resources simply because a person is maybe here without an authorization or overstayed a visa or was brought here as a child and is now grown and has no other place to go. So that the Welcome City Ordinance essentially makes Chicago a safer place because people can then rely on the police to do their job, to not be afraid that if someone is burglarizing my home that I can call the police because I'm not concerned that then they're gonna call ICE on me and that sort of thing. So it's supposed to serve as an incentive for people to use the police as they should, and hopefully as a disincentive so that the immigrant communities aren't targeted just because bad guys think, well, they're afraid of immigration, so we can do whatever we want. And that's sort of the underlying sentiment, right? But we want people to not have to worry about the immigration status affecting their everyday lives.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments to make? Thank you,
Uh,
everyone. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. I just would like to thank you again, Andres and Catherine, and all of us, because we are really taking care of the people who are not only our clients, but live here and they can listen to this recording and also give a hand to the lawyers in Illinois. So thank you, everyone, for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everyone.